CD 7. Wake up! Izzy, freezing cold despite her run along the towpath, was only pretending to sleep. She'd thrown herself into her sleeping bag fully clothed, and now, still shivering, she made a show of telling Tolly off for disturbing her. Tolly mustn't know she'd had a hand in whatever had happened tonight.
Go away! Let me sleep!
Izzy opened one eye to see what Tolly was doing. Even if everything had turned out for the best, Tolly would be mortified if she thought Izzy had interfered in her life. Tolly was putting on her pyjamas by the light of the stove. Then she plonked herself on the edge of Izzy's bunk.
Wake up! Something wonderful's happened. What?
Izzy pushed back her sleeping bag and glared at her.
You've got your jumper on.
Tolly stared at her. Izzy searched for an excuse.
I'm cold.
Tolly nodded. Izzy could see she was so excited she wouldn't need to ask any more questions.
Tommy's going to buy the currant bun. I shall run it.
Izzy couldn't help herself. A strangled cry came from her throat. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined Tommy would go that far to hold on to the girl he cared about. She knew he had a silver tongue, and she'd hoped he could persuade Tolly not to go into Braunston and make a spectacle of herself. But this was something she'd never envisaged. Tommy must really love the girl.
Tell me everything,
she begged. She had to know how this had come about. Eventually, when Tolly had explained about the money Steve had left to Tommy, Izzy asked,
But how can you take money from one man when earlier today you were out of your mind with wanting Sonny?
Tolly smiled.
The cafe means more to me than any man. I think I wanted Sonny to notice me because no man has ever looked at me with longing in his eyes. I mean, have you seen the way Jack looks at Elsie? Like he could eat her up. Sonny's a gorgeous man, and I thought if I threw myself at him...
She paused.
Well, baking him an apple pie didn't win me any favours, did it? At least, if he chucked me over afterwards, like he does most of the women, I'd know what it's like to be made love to by a man.
Izzy looked confused.
But why?
She was well aware of the answer, but she wanted Tolly to put it into words.
I was willing to give myself to Sonny, but it's what's inside a person that counts. It's more than mooning after someone with good looks. Tommy's kindness showed me he obviously cares more about me than he does about himself.
She looked at Izzy with moist eyes.
I'm going to take Tommy home with me to meet my family. He's lost Steve-o, who really cared about him. My dad and Regina will love him. Will you care about him?
Izzy asked.
Could you eventually see yourself loving him? How can I not?
Tolly replied.
He saved me from myself.
Dorothy, darling, it will be over soon. The inmates can't take it in. Probably don't see any future after what has already happened in the past. Please God I live to see this liberation. The number of inmates are dwindling daily. Typhus causes more deaths than starvation. Kramer, our camp commandant, does not care what happens to us. No one here receives letters. Most are too weak to bother to write. I am certain correspondence is read and burned. Life is so cheap. What price letters? There are enormous open graves here at Belsen, and the German guards today were ordered to straighten out rotting bodies. Those who have not died of malnutrition or sickness had been dosed with phenol. 2 minutes and 1 injection of carbolic acid adds another to the pile. They like to lay the corpses in rows because it's easier to bulldoze the dirt over them. I found this label from a tin, and I cried. It's from my home country, Polish beetroot. The paper is quite dry, surprisingly. I'm wondering how come it's not been eaten. I am using it to write on, my darling. Always I think of you. It gives me strength. Jakub.
Dear Geoffrey, we will be climbing the Hatton Flight's locks on our way to Birmingham, and should reach them this Friday at some time. As you state you would like us to meet as soon as possible, I can be at the Hatton Fields public house on Birmingham Road sometime in the evening. I trust you'll understand why it's impossible for me to give you a definite hour. Elsie.
Chapter 32.
Do you want me to come with you? After the day we've had?
Elsie stopped scrubbing her arms with carbolic soap and looked at Dorothy, whose face showed lines of fatigue and anxiety.
You must be shattered. I'm worried about you meeting Geoffrey.
Dorothy was washing the plates and pots in a bucket of soapy water. They'd eaten Bovril fritters, and the bottom of the frying pan had caught and blackened. She was cross because, no matter how hard she scrubbed, the marks wouldn't come off.
I telephoned Jack from that phone box way back along the cut. He wanted to come with me. I told him that would certainly put the cat among the pigeons. My current man meeting my husband?
Elsie laughed, then let out a groan and rubbed her hand across the base of her spine. Dorothy gave her a look.
It's just normal aches and pains. Who'd have thought we'd climb 21 locks? No wonder Hatton Flight is sometimes called the Stairway to Heaven. I heard all over. Stairway to Hell, more like. 2 miles of locks. Wait until we hit Birmingham. It's nothing but locks. Are you sure you're capable of working so hard? What with the baby?
Elsie began cleaning her teeth. When she'd finished, she spat in the dirty water and said,
Do you think the gypsy women worry about things like that? The doctor assured me... All right, said Dorothy, interrupting her.
There was hardly room to move in the small cabin space with both women busying themselves. Elsie knew she'd have to hurry if she wanted to get to the pub before it closed, if it was even open. Spirits and beer were in short supply due to war shortages. Sometimes pubs closed early or often didn't open but left a sign on the door, "No beer." Dorothy had suggested mooring Mallard and Bunting on a quiet strip of water above the locks, which would make it easier for Elsie to walk back along the towpath and take the lane towards the Hatton Fields, a popular public house.
I haven't even heard whether he'll be there. Didn't you telephone?
Dorothy looked puzzled. Elsie shook her head.
Not when I phoned Jack. My mind was consumed with the Hatton Flight. In fact, I should have washed my hair, but there hasn't been time for anything, let alone finding another telephone box.
Elsie was now pulling a brush through her fair hair and wincing as it hit tangles. She looked at herself in the small square of mirror.
Do you think I look all right? Your skin's the colour of russet apple, your hair's shining, and you're wearing a skirt. What more could a husband who did the dirty on you want?
Elsie threw the hairbrush at her. Then she eased her feet into a pair of slip-on shoes and did a little twirl in the small space. Dorothy was right. Elsie had looked and felt healthier than she ever had before they'd met. Tanned and fit, she was also happier than she'd ever been. She hoped when she returned from her meeting with Geoffrey, she'd still feel the same.
Sure you don't want some moral support?
Elsie hugged Dorothy.
You're a good friend, she said, but I'd better do this on my own.
She broke away and pointed towards the stairs.
You can see the pub if you stand out by the tiller, and I don't intend to stay any longer than I have to.
Dorothy picked up a greying tea towel and began drying dishes. It was a signal for Elsie to leave. She picked her way along the towpath, past the lock, then hurried towards the sound of noise and music. Such a lot had happened, and she knew she'd changed so much since she'd left Gosport. Elsie took a deep breath, opened the pub door, and went inside, tucking the blackout curtain in place behind her. The cigarette fumes and smell of stale beer enveloped her as she made her way through the crowd. How would she and Geoffrey feel when they met each other? Although she'd hated him when he'd virtually dismissed her from his life, she knew now that that had been his greatest gift to her.
"Small lemonade,"
she said to the girl in a tight sweater with piled-up blonde hair behind the bar. Elsie took a sip of the tepid liquid, then looked about her. The place was busy, the wireless playing, and Elsie recognised several gypsy boaters. She almost dismissed the scruffy man sitting in the corner wearing a plaid suit. His Trilby hat and dark raincoat lay upon a chair. He was staring around the bar, and when his eyes fell on her, he frowned. He blinked, almost as if he hadn't recognised her. Then he smiled. How could anyone age so much in such a short time? Wondered Elsie, as she made her way towards him, a smile plastered on her face. His usually immaculate hair was greasy, and much longer than she remembered. Had his face always been so heavy-jowled? She put her glass on the table, then pulled off her gabardine raincoat. It was grubby, torn and covered with grass stains. She tried to roll it up before she made room for it on the same chair as Geoffrey's hat and coat. Geoffrey rose formally to his feet. For a moment, Elsie thought her husband was going to shake her hand, but he pointed to an empty chair next to the table. "I managed to save you a seat," he said. She saw he'd put on weight, despite the fullness of his overlarge suit. The long jacket was ill-fitting. The baggy trousers tapered to his ankles. She could smell the Brill cream plastered on his hair. "My, aren't you the pinnacle of fashion?" she said, and immediately chastised herself for her sarcasm. Geoffrey appeared not to have noticed. Elsie felt very dull in her old but cleanish clothes. She was aware that Geoffrey's eyes hadn't left her. A quick look around the room told her that a few boat women were sitting with their men. They wore colourful skirts and gold jewellery. She saw Geoffrey look away, then brush at some long red hairs on his jacket. "Sandra changed her hair colour?" The words came out of her lips unbidden. Geoffrey gave her a mournful smile. "Her cat. It gets everywhere." He smiled, then began foraging in his inside pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted a folded envelope and gave it to her. As Elsie bent forward to take it, she could smell his cologne. It briefly passed through her mind that, working on the cut, she seldom noticed men's cologne. Mostly it was sweat, cigarettes and diesel fumes, sometimes snuff. Now Geoffrey was speaking. "Before I even tell you how well you look and how glad I am to see you, I need to hand over this cheque." "Have you sold our house?" The words escaped along with a feeling of sudden loss. "Not yet, but the cheque's for the equivalent of what you'd receive if, when the sale goes through. I thought you might need the money." "Need? It's what I'm owed, Geoffrey." He looked at her intently as she opened the envelope and stared at the cheque. Elsie nodded. She was satisfied with the amount, and Geoffrey never did anything that he wasn't 100% sure of. "You've been very accommodating to me." He sought her eyes. "Which is, in part, why I needed to see you." He leaned across the table and picked up the hand that wasn't holding the cheque. "Elsie, you can come home again, soon, to live." It took a while for his words to sink into her brain. He was actually telling her she could come back to Gosport. "To you? And Western Way, is that what you mean?" Her words crackled in her throat. He nodded. Elsie's brain was whirling. Never in her wildest dreams had she expected him to say that. Only, he wasn't asking her, was he? He was telling her she could return home. "If I don't come back right now, does that mean you'll cancel the cheque?" He squeezed her hand, then held on to it. "Of course not. You'll need time to think over my offer. When we bought the house in Western Way, you put in a great deal of the money you'd earned from teaching. I'm merely returning to you what belongs to you. It's quite possible I might not need to sell the house after all." "Oh," was all Elsie could find to say. She bent towards her coat and tucked the envelope into her pocket. Through the fluffy cloud that had suddenly become her brain, she remembered Sandra. "What about Sandra? It can't be long before she's due to give birth." "Don't you worry about Sandra. Some interesting information has come to light." Elsie saw a shadow pass across his eyes. Immediately she guessed something bad had happened. The big romance was at a standstill, perhaps? She removed her hand from his. I'm going to file for custody of my baby. Sandra isn't fit to be a wife, let alone a mother. You, on the other hand, have always wanted children. I've decided we can make a go of our marriage and cement it with my child. Elsie stared at him. He really believed what he was saying. His arrogance was beyond measure. Then she realised he'd always been like that, able to put himself and his own wishes before anyone else's. He was assuming she would drop everything and do his bidding, just as she always had. Oh, she had no doubt he would find some way to remove Sandra's child from her. After all, he was good at his job. But what a hateful action for him to take. A child needed its mother, its rightful mother. She thought of her own baby, snug and safe within her. How dare he contemplate depriving another woman of her child? Elsie had never wanted another woman's child. She'd wanted her own. They had never discussed adoption. She thought of all the years they had been disappointed with no sign of a baby. But she was now pregnant, which meant that their lack of success was nothing to do with her. She'd been so caught up in her own happiness and good fortune that she hadn't stopped to think what this meant for Geoffrey and Sandra's baby. Now, though, surely it couldn't be his. Elsie knew then she had to tell him. She no longer loved him, but she could not allow Sandra to make an absolute fool of him. She picked up her warm lemonade, took a long draught and put down the glass. I'm never coming back to Gosport, Geoffrey. I've met someone and I'm pregnant. There, she had told him. Geoffrey's face crumpled like a screwed-up envelope as the information reached his brain. Are you sure? His face was grey, like used putty. I've seen a doctor. But, he blustered. We tried for years. I know. But I've fallen in love. You can't be pregnant. Geoffrey, listen to yourself. Don't raise your voice. It's a fact. There was silence while he simply stared at her. But, he repeated. That means the fault lies with me. His forehead creased with the effort of trying to reconcile himself to the awful truth. It's highly unlikely the baby Sandra is expecting is mine. Well, yes, Geoffrey. I'm afraid so. Chapter 33. With his elbows on the table, Geoffrey's head was in his hands. His shoulders heaved. Elsie knew he was crying, but he wouldn't thank her for acknowledging it. He'd been dealt a terrible blow. She wanted to reach out to him because she felt sorry Sandra had taken him in, hook, line and sinker. Geoffrey, so sure of his own virility, had been blind to the possibility that the cause of their failure might lie with him. You all right, mate? Elsie was startled by the voice she knew so well. She looked away from Geoffrey's crumpled figure and up into Jack's familiar eyes above her. He shook his head at Elsie, and she knew he didn't want her to let on to Geoffrey that she knew him. The only possible reason for that would be because Jack realised Geoffrey couldn't take the news that he was Elsie's lover. Certainly not at this crucial moment. No, Geoffrey was clearly in no state to absorb further shocks. Knowing Jack as she did, she doubted it would be long before Geoffrey knew the truth. Jack didn't like secrets. Geoffrey raised his head and stared at Jack. Who the hell are you? I've been watching you, and it's clear you're upset. Do you want to get out of this crowded place for some fresh air? Faces were turned towards Geoffrey and Elsie. Even the darts players had halted their game and were staring. It's not air I need, but peace and quiet. I've booked a room here. I'll go upstairs. Geoffrey rose shakily to his feet. Elsie saw all the cat hairs on his trousers, and her heart went out to him. This wasn't her fastidious Geoffrey. This was a broken man. And why shouldn't he be in pieces? It's one thing to understand that your wife and yourself can't conceive a child. Another to discover that you're infertile and that another woman is lying to you about her pregnancy.
I'll come with you,
Elsie said, rising. She watched as Jack put out an arm to help him up. Geoffrey fumbled in his pocket for his room key.
I've had a bit of a shock, old man,
he said hesitantly. I can see that. And I don't suppose you want to share it with everyone in here. The wireless was playing Pistol Packing Mama. Elsie thought in the future, when she heard that song, she'd always shudder. Eyes were upon them. Elsie looked at Jack and saw the genuine concern on his face. He turned to Elsie and took a note from his trouser pocket. He needs brandy. I think we all do. Can you do the honours? Elsie returned to the bar and was immediately served. Are you all right? Asked the blonde. Elsie nodded and, clutching the 3 glasses, followed Jack and Geoffrey out into the hallway, where wide stairs led up to the bedrooms. Jack took the key from Geoffrey, then opened a door along the short corridor. Elsie thought he looked tired, and his legs seemed to be bothering him. Inside the basic, clean room, Geoffrey sank onto a chair.
Drink this,
said Elsie. She offered him a glass, and he swallowed the brandy in one gulp. He put the glass on the bedside table and looked at Jack. Elsie set down the other 2.
Thanks for your support, he said. I'll be all right now. You can go.
Jack shook his head. No, I don't think so. There's a few things need to be clarified about Elsie and myself. At Jack's words, Geoffrey's brain seemed to spring back to life. Wait a minute, he said. You? He stared at Jack. And her? He looked at Elsie. She nodded. I couldn't let her come and meet you on her own, could I? Not that Elsie knew I'd be here. Elsie felt suddenly grateful that their secret was out. Geoffrey put his hand to his head, as though everything was too much for him.
I didn't mean to hurt you,
began Elsie.
Back in Gosport, you made it clear that you wanted me out of the way.
She trailed off. She was glad now that Jack had unexpectedly turned up, and she hadn't had to face Geoffrey on her own. Elsie knelt down on the carpet near her husband.
I expect a similar thing happened between you and Sandra, she said. Falling in love? Quite out of the blue I fell for Jack. We couldn't help it.
Geoffrey put a hand on her shoulder. He stared into her eyes.
I've treated you appallingly,
he said, in a very small voice. She wanted to tell him that everything had turned out fine, but it hadn't, not for him. He let out a huge sigh.
It's all my own fault. I've been well and truly hoodwinked, he said.
Then, with some force, he said,
"A bitch!"
Jack moved in close to Elsie.
You're not going to get violent, are you?
His body had tensed. Elsie saw his hands were clenched into fists. Geoffrey said,
I didn't mean Elsie. I meant the woman I lost my head over, ended my marriage for.
Sandra, Jack offered.
I see you've talked about us.
I'd like to think we didn't leave any skeletons in the cupboard, Elsie and I. Jack sighed. My name's Jack, by the way, Jack Lumley. Geoffrey said,
I think I'd like to be on my own now.
Will you be all right?
Elsie's voice held a plaintive note, but she could see Geoffrey had regained his composure.
As all right as any man whose dream of becoming a father has just been shot down in flames.
He looked at Jack.
And talking to my wife's paramour, who has impregnated her, isn't exactly going to make me feel better, is it?
Jack said,
If you're sure you're going to be all right, we'll leave you.
He turned to Elsie. Or do you intend to stay for a while? Elsie was now standing.
Go,
said Geoffrey. He eyed the 2 untouched drinks on the dressing table.
But you can leave those, he said.
Elsie and Jack made a move towards the door. Jack paused.
I never meant any of this to happen, but I'll look after Elsie.
Geoffrey said,
Good luck to you both.
Elsie thought she saw again the glimmer of tears in Geoffrey's eyes. He turned away. Then he glanced back at her and whispered, "I should have looked after you." Jack opened the door and the two of them filed into the corridor. "I won't go without saying goodbye," Geoffrey called to Elsie. He came and stood in the doorway. "I'll catch you up on the canal." Elsie stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. She felt as though a load had been lifted from her shoulders. Knowing Geoffrey as she did, she guessed he'd have a sore head in the morning. He'd probably order more brandy from the bar. Then he'd be planning how best to get rid of Sandra. Down in the smoky bar, ignoring the curious looks from the drinkers, Jack asked, "You're not angry with me for coming here, are you?" Elsie shook her head. "There was no need," she said. "Oh, yes, there was," Jack murmured. She wanted to snuggle into him, but it didn't seem right with all those eyes upon them. She thought instead of the blow that Geoffrey had taken, and how his dream of a son or daughter had been shattered. She didn't love him any more, but she was still saddened by how everything had turned out for him. "My car's outside," Jack said. "Come home with me. I'll make sure you're back at the boat early in the morning." She thought of the welcoming house, his cosy bedroom, lying in his arms. It was very tempting. Elsie shook her head. "If I come to the Lock Cottage, I'll never want to leave it. Dorothy will be worrying. I must get back to her." She remembered the cheque in her coat pocket. She took it out, stared at the envelope, then said, "I'll not be coming to you with nothing. This is my share of the house money." He frowned. "We don't need Geoffrey's money. Return it. I can provide." "It's not Geoffrey's," Elsie said. "It's mine." She patted her stomach. "And I'm sure we'll find an excellent use for it." Jack shook his head. His fair hair fell across his eyes, and he used a hand to brush it away. "I think I've bitten off more than I can chew with you," he said, gathering her close. "You're a hell of a woman, Elsie. Did I ever tell you I love you?" Chapter 34. On their way at last, after a scrambled egg breakfast, somehow Tolly always made the powder taste like real eggs, and a prolonged catch-up on all of last night's happenings, Elsie was now walking along the towpath, careful not to slip in the mud, and watching the shimmering water of the cut. It had rained during the night, but now a light yellow sun had ventured out. It had been Elsie's turn to clear the weed hatch, not a job to look forward to at the best of times. Her fingertips still felt frozen as she held tightly to the lock key given to her by Jack. Thank God all she'd had to do this morning was to make sure the propellers were clear of rubbish by leaning down into the hatch and feeling about in the murky water. She marvelled at Tommy, who had crawled into the cut's icy depths to clear the rope that had been entwined around the propellers. Tommy and the cafe were now all Tolly talked about from the moment she woke to the time she fell asleep. Geoffrey walked beside her. He'd surprised her by appearing at the moored boats while they were eating and asking Dorothy if she minded him taking up some of Elsie's time. "Shirley's Tunnel's on the agenda for today. It's more than 400 yards long, and once we enter the tunnel we can't stop. But if you—" she'd nodded at Elsie. "Want to walk up towards the next lock together, you can talk in relative privacy." Dorothy had taken pity on the downcast man. Elsie's mind kept turning over all that had happened last night. She hoped Geoffrey knew how he was going to sort out his life. She had loved him once. She felt no animosity towards him. He had done her a good turn, if anything. If she hadn't become an idle woman, she'd never have found Jack. Whenever she thought of Jack and her baby, a trickle of warmth ran through her body. It had taken all of her willpower to return to the boat last night, when she had really wanted to go home to the cottage, shut the door, and stay forever safe with Jack and Matey. She wondered now if she had done the right thing in saying she would sign on for a second trip with Dorothy. "I'm sorry about the way things turned out between us," Geoffrey said. "It's been a double blow to my ego, finding out you don't want to come back to Gosport." He suddenly smiled at her. "Actually, I can see what a pompous prig I've been, expecting you to jump at my bidding. I know now I could have been a better husband to you." "I think we both learned a lot from what's happened," she said, gazing at him. She thought he looked out of place in his silly suit, which did nothing for him except make him look ridiculous. She wasn't going to tell him that, though, was she? Perhaps, now he knew the truth about Sandra, he'd go back to thinking for himself. His dark suits suited both him and his profession. Geoffrey's repeated apologies weren't moving things forward. She was about to change the subject when he said, "I dare say you'd like to marry Jack." Elsie's eyes opened wide.
"You'd allow a divorce?"
It was a dirty word. "I owe you, after all the unhappiness I've put you through."
"You'd allow me to start proceedings? You wouldn't contest?"
She looked up into his face. He nodded and smiled. Her grin almost split her face in two. Had Geoffrey suddenly reverted to the caring man he'd been when they'd first met? She was so happy it was easy to walk along in companionable silence. Fields spread into the distance around them. The harvest had been cut, and the colours ranged from dull yellow to brown. The water rippled in a light breeze. No sign of another boat coming along the cut. Ahead, a brick bridge rose above the water. A road ran over it. Along its banks, blackberry brambles. The fruit ripe, glinted and beckoned. She looked across towards Bunting, half expecting Tolly at the tiller to start making noises about gathering fruits. There was, after all, still a little of the sugar left. A car was parked in a lay-by along the narrow road. Elsie's heart lurched. A dark-haired man was leaning nonchalantly on the open door of the Chrysler. With horror, she recognised him.
"Oh, my God!"
Elsie turned and stared at Bunting. Tolly waved to her. It had been her turn to cook breakfast, but Izzy had volunteered to wash up. She was hidden in the cabin. "What's up?" Geoffrey asked.
"That man, leaning on his car. It's Charlie."
Elsie could see her words meant little to Geoffrey.
"Charlie was Izzy's boyfriend. He knocked her about. She ran away from Gosport to escape him. The last we heard, he was detained by the police. She'll be horrified to find he's followed and found her."
"Just a moment. I know him. I was in court the day he was charged. He's out on bail. He's not supposed to move away from Gosport." Geoffrey squinted for a better look. Elsie saw Charlie slam the door of his car. Then he half walked, half slid down the bank towards the area of the towpath near the base of the road bridge. Elsie was sure that immediately Mallard nosed her way through, Charlie would jump aboard looking for Izzy. "I wasn't personally involved in the case, which hasn't ended yet, but I certainly know all about it. He's a nasty piece of work. Look at that." Charlie was now standing on the deck of Mallard. Dorothy didn't look very happy about it and was remonstrating with him. Elsie pulled on Geoffrey's arm.
"We'd better get on board."
Elsie and Geoffrey piled on next to Dorothy from the same spot where Charlie had boarded. There certainly wasn't room enough for them all on the rear of Mallard.
"Who the hell do you think you are? This is private property,"
Dorothy hissed. "Look here, man." Geoffrey's voice was overshadowed by Charlie's more strident tones. "Hold your horses, I'm looking for Izzy."
"You can't just jump on my boat,"
insisted Dorothy. Elsie saw she couldn't do much to persuade Charlie to get off because she was holding on to the tiller. Elsie was hoping Dorothy wouldn't tell him that Izzy was on the other boat trailing behind.
"There's barely room for me to steer,"
Dorothy shouted. "I can soon sort out that little problem," Charlie said. "You think about telling me where my Izzy is, while I sit up here out of the way." He jumped up and perched on the cabin's roof, his legs dangling down in the stairway. He had an amused expression on his face as he smoothed the material of his dark suit. As always, thought Elsie, he was immaculately dressed. "I'm well out of the way up here," he said. "Izzy's got to be around somewhere." He bent forward and looked down inside the cabin, then sat upright again, facing Geoffrey, Elsie and Dorothy. Now all three of them had to gaze up at him, sitting high above them. "Where have you hidden her, then? There's no room in there, even for a little un like Izzy." Charlie smiled, showing his strong teeth, and his eyes swept past them to the boat, trailing behind. "Of course." He slapped his head as if he'd made a mistake. "I'm on the wrong boat. She'll be on that one." Elsie interrupted.
"How did you find us?"
The bridge was behind them now, and the tunnel ahead loomed closer. The scenery had reverted to fields and lush foliage, with the crispness in the air that autumn brings. "Wasn't hard, darling? Not when you left a letter to your hubby there?" Charlie nodded towards Geoffrey. "On your table it was." "You broke into my house," said Geoffrey, his face like thunder. Dorothy was watching the cut ahead and began fumbling at the controls. "Come on. I didn't touch anything. I knew Izzy would tell your missus where she was going, and I was right. Elsie left you a note, didn't she? Didn't take me long to win over the girl in Rousham Cruisers to tell me whereabouts."
"She's not here,"
Elsie cried.
"We're coming up fast to a tunnel," Dorothy shouted. "You'll need to get down. It's difficult for me to slow."
"Yeah, and I suppose you expect me to get off this boat and go away like a good boy?"
"You need to move."
Dorothy was white-faced.
"I can't stop in time."
"Trust me to pick the wrong boat," Charlie said. "Izzy needs to know who the strong one is in this setup." Charlie got no further, for the almighty crack that was the back of his head on the blue-grey bricks of Shrouli Tunnel echoed in the sudden darkness as the boat sailed into the opening and he was flung forward.
"Oh, my God!"
Dorothy was trying to slow the boat and hurled the engine into reverse. But too late. Charlie had been knocked from his high seat down into the footwell.
"Reverse!"
shouted Elsie to Tolly in the butty. Her face was a mask of horror at what had happened. Izzy had appeared on the stairs with a tea towel in her hand, clearly mystified at the commotion.
"What's going on?"
Elsie saw the words form on Izzy's lips. Geoffrey had fallen to his knees and was examining Charlie. Already blood was creeping through Charlie's dark curls and staining the back of his shirt collar. Elsie watched, surprised, as Geoffrey seemed to know exactly what he was doing. But for some reason he was searching Charlie's suit pockets. Dorothy had managed to reverse the boat towards the landing stage near the entrance to the tunnel. The butty had bumped into the back of Mallard. Tolly, quick-witted as usual, had handed over the tiller to Izzy, jumped to the towpath holding a rope, and was pulling Bunting towards the side of the canal. "We can't do anything for him here," said Geoffrey. "He's breathing. Keep him warm. Don't move him. Try to keep that young woman away. I'm going for his car." Elsie knew that young woman meant Izzy.
"What do you mean, his car?"
asked Dorothy. She had regained full control of Mallard and was tucking the boat in at the front of Bunting. Geoffrey climbed over the side onto the towpath and threw another rope towards Tolly. He began jogging back the way the boats had travelled.
"Why go for Charlie's car? Why not find a phone box and call an ambulance?"
Dorothy asked. Elsie was attempting to cover Charlie with a blanket, but Dorothy winced at the amount of blood that had poured from the back of Charlie's head and was now pooling red and dark on the wooden planking. She took off her coat and wedged it beneath his neck, hoping to stem the bleeding. His hair was wet and matted.
"Oh, my God! It's all my fault!"
Dorothy cried.
"You tried to warn him. He wouldn't listen," said Elsie. "And it's probably quicker to take him to a hospital than it is to find a phone box to ask for an ambulance to come. Trust Geoffrey. He's had first aid training. Maybe an ambulance wouldn't be able to reach us here on the towpath. You're probably right."
Dorothy looked towards Tolly.
"I'd better help her," she said.
Izzy was standing at the back of Bunting, her face like chalk.
"Help us tie up!"
shouted Dorothy. Izzy seemed to gather herself together and threw out the other mooring rope. Dorothy jumped to the towpath, picked up the rope before it drifted back into the water, and began to haul in the butty behind Mallard.
What happened? What happened?
Izzy asked over and over again. Dorothy ignored her.
How far away is Charlie's car?
Can't be that far away, replied Elsie. Dorothy was tying a rope around a fence post. Izzy had jumped from Bunting, landed on the towpath, and was climbing onto Mallard when she saw Charlie lying motionless on the deck.
Jesus! That's Charlie! What's happened? Is that blood? Is he still breathing?
I think so, Elsie said, trying to hold Izzy back from touching him. The enormity of what had happened made Elsie's gorge rise. She grabbed the side rail and was sick into the cut. Dorothy shouted, "Pull yourself together!" The sharpness of her tone jolted Elsie, and she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Both boats were stationary now, tied to the fence and to thick hedge branches. Elsie held Izzy. Tears were running down her friend's face.
Is he going to be all right?
She whimpered. Elsie could feel Izzy shivering with shock.
Leave him be. He needs air. Geoffrey's good in emergencies.
Izzy's small body was cold. The boats had been tied, and they were well out of the way of any passing craft. Dorothy was looking worried. Tolly was unusually quiet. In Elsie's arms, Izzy was still shivering. Elsie suddenly realised she was cold too. "Tolly, put the kettle on!" she yelled. Chapter 35. Geoffrey returned to find Charlie unconscious, but wrapped in several blankets to keep him warm. The minutes had seemed like hours to the girls, waiting for him. "I've parked his car on the road above the tunnel," Geoffrey said. He took Charlie's pulse, then pushed back the matted curls. "The blood stopped flowing," he announced. "Warwick and Coventry copped V2s last night. A farmer walking along the road told me. Clearing up operations are in progress. Thank God we don't need to hang around waiting for hospital transport."
If the blood stopped, does that mean Charlie could live?
Izzy asked. Her face was stained with dirt and tears. Geoffrey guessed that, however badly Charlie had treated Izzy in the past, there had been a time when they'd loved each other. She had a right to remember that. "It's why I've collected his Chrysler," he said. "I know you shouldn't really move accident victims, but with those big raids to attend to, it could be hours before an ambulance gets here."
Do you know where the nearest hospital is?
Dorothy asked. Her face was chalk white. "I've a pretty good idea, and I've got a tongue in my head." Geoffrey scooped the big man up in his arms, staggering under Charlie's weight as he manoeuvred him off the boat. He was breathless as he mumbled to Dorothy, "Can you follow me? I've got to climb that rise to the road, and he's no lightweight." Without replying, Dorothy did as he had asked, walking in his shadow. Only once did he stumble and knock against her, but he was able to use her as ballast and not lose his grip on Charlie. The blood smelt of metal, strong and pungent. Geoffrey heard Dorothy's sigh of relief when they reached the road. All the women followed him to the car, sad and dejected.
Warwick Hospital can't be far. Elsie, do you want to come with us?
Izzy gave a sob when she saw that the blood from Charlie's head had transferred itself to Geoffrey's jacket.
"I think it should be me,"
she said, looking at Dorothy, who nodded her assent. "Get into the back of the car and fold that blanket on your lap, then." Izzy did as she was told, while Geoffrey, as carefully as he could, but with great difficulty, laid Charlie across the back seats so that his head rested on the folded blanket. "I'll get in touch with the police, Dorothy, and report the accident. There's no need for you to hang about here. You've got a job to do for the war effort." He climbed into the driver's seat and the car burst into life. He wound down the window. "Don't clear up the blood and don't tread in it. The police may want to look at the boat if Charlie doesn't survive." Geoffrey drove slowly into the centre of the lane. Soon the car was a small dot and eventually disappeared. Mallard and Bunting were moored above Knoll Locks when Geoffrey caught up with them again. Elsie could see Izzy had been crying.
"He's gone,"
was all Izzy said, and flew into Elsie's arms. Dorothy disentangled Izzy from Elsie and took her down into the warmth of Mallard's cabin. Geoffrey didn't step onto the boat, but made a sign that he wanted to talk to Elsie. She left the boat to join him. He was grim-faced. "He died at the hospital. When you finally reach Birmingham, you may get a police visit, you may not. So leave the blood. The hospital concur it was an accident, and we did the best we could to save him. But they will do an autopsy. What I need from you, Elsie, is a few details of why you think Charlie came to find Izzy. Talk to her when she settled down and make a note of how her life with Charlie was. I need to know as much as I can in case they do decide it was more than an accident. This is just a safety measure. I've also contacted the Grand Union Canal Company in my capacity as a solicitor. The assertion that this was just a horrible accident will bear more weight coming from me than Dorothy, who might be put in a compromising situation when it comes out that Izzy was trying to hide from Charlie." Elsie walked to the car with him. While he'd been talking, she'd realised how far apart, back in Gosport, as a married couple, they'd become. She should have felt she could confide in Geoffrey when Izzy was constantly in fear of Charlie. How sad it was that it had taken Charlie's death to regain the art of communication between them. "I'm talking to you, and the others, of course, in a purely professional capacity now, because I was present when the accident occurred. I'm sure nothing more will come of this."
"You did all you could to help Charlie," Elsie said. "That was good of you. And the one bright thing to come from this is that Izzy won't need to keep looking over her shoulder now."
Geoffrey touched Elsie's cheek. "I'm driving back to the pub at Hatton Flight. I told the police I'd leave Charlie's car there. Then I'm returning to Gosport. You know where I am, if you need anything, professional or otherwise." He smiled at her. "I'm glad you're going to be happy, Elsie. Jack's a lucky man." Elsie wanted to ask how he would deal with Sandra, but whatever Geoffrey did now was none of her business. Dinner that night was a one-saucepan stew, courtesy of Izzy, who said she needed to keep busy. Nevertheless, it was a sombre affair, with only a cup of cocoa for pudding. All the girls wanted to do after finishing their chores was sleep. Dorothy was reading by the light of the stove, but was unable to pay attention to the words on the page, for they seemed to run into one another. She'd volunteered the visit to Southampton because she knew Izzy was scared of going back to Gosport. She wondered if now Izzy would see a trip on her own boat as cathartic. But if the girl wasn't ready to be alone, she wouldn't go back on her promise. Her fear that her own secret would come to light must take second place.
"Are you awake?"
she called softly to Elsie.
Elsie grunted back at her. "I'm making tea. Want a cup?"
Dorothy sat up in her bunk. The book toppled to the floor.
"Love one. You are signing on for another trip, aren't you?"
Elsie ladled water from the bucket into the kettle.
"I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Today's made me see that life's too short to plan very far ahead. Back in Gosport, I worried about getting blown up during an air raid. This war work is worthwhile, but I so want to be with Jack. Today showed me that death can happen any time." "I understand," Dorothy said. "All of us needed to get away, do something different." "You needed to escape from what?" Dorothy didn't doubt that Elsie wouldn't gossip to Izzy and Tolly, but fear stopped her confiding. "Just life at home in Southampton," she said. "I've got to know many of the gypsies, and most are good folk. Even the hard work and long hours don't bother me anymore. But I still want something more." She swallowed a tear. "I envy you, Elsie. You have happiness before you now." "I'm thankful for that. The baby and Jack," Elsie said. "Mind you, Tolly is pretty happy too. She's going to get her cafe." "Yes, and I wouldn't mind betting one day she'll look at Tommy and see what a good man he is." "It's funny how things work out. I expect in Bunting, Tolly and Izzy are talking things over as well." Elsie was quiet for a moment. Dorothy could hear the kettle bubbling on the stove.
She knew it wouldn't be long before Izzy gained the courage to strike out on her own, making a life for herself, now she had a floating home to work from.
"If you don't do another trip, you have my blessing," Dorothy said. "But I hope you change your mind. There are only about 30 of us women working the canals at present."
Elsie was pouring boiling water into the teapot.
"Really? I'd have thought there'd be more." "It's too hard. The work is dirty, heavy. I've stuck at it because it's necessary for me to be away from home."
She realised what she had said and waited for Elsie to ask her what she meant. But Elsie was putting mugs on the makeshift table and either hadn't heard or was too polite to ask.
"I must admit that you 3 girls have become more than employees to me," Dorothy went on. "I look upon you all as firm friends."
She bent down, picked her book up from the floor and tucked it beneath her pillow. She was comforted by the crackle of the letter there. Elsie handed her a mug of sweet tea.
"I won't be needing my car that's parked at the basin. There's petrol enough in it. Why don't you use it to travel south?"
"That's kind of you," Dorothy said.
"If you're really sure."
She wasn't ready yet to divulge her secret to Elsie, but, oh, how she wished she was. Chapter 36. It was raining when Mallard and Bunting arrived at Tyseley Yard in Birmingham. Rubbish floated in the cut, and Dorothy did her best to skirt around old bedsteads poking out of the dirty, smelly water. Dank buildings and tall walls lined the canal side, and filthy smoke belched from factory chimneys.
"This rain is going to make it harder to clean the boats," she said.
At the goods yard, materials of all sorts were being loaded onto trains and lorries. Cranes perched like strange birds grabbing food for their young, as narrowboat holds were emptied or filled. Dorothy went to the Grand Union Canal Company office, filled in the never-ending paperwork, and received her next instructions. With the boats tied up and Dorothy back in their midst, the girls went into a cafe while waiting their turn for Mallard and Bunting to be unloaded, then reloaded. Condensation ran down the windows and gathered on the grubby net curtains. The air smelt of grease. Omelette and chips seemed the safest bet, even though Dorothy knew the omelette had never seen a real egg, just as the marked tablecloth had never seen a wash.
"We're taking scrap metal on board here,"
she said, around a mouthful of soggy chips.
"We deposited at Banbury, and then we're home for a while."
Smiles spread across their faces.
"I know all about Banbury," Tolly said. "Banbury cakes come from there. Fruit filling inside pastry. And don't forget Lady Godiva riding through the market town in the Nuddy," Elsie said. "Lady Godiva took off her clothes in Coventry," Dorothy said. "Though likely a local girl rode in the May Day procession, showing a bit more than she should."
She was glad her charges had cheered up.
"And then from Banbury it's straight back to Lower Hayford?" Elsie asked.
"Yes," said Dorothy. She looked at Elsie, whose face was now one big smile. No doubt she was looking forward to seeing Jack. Outside, dusk was gathering. She wondered when the elderly waitress would think about drawing the blackout curtains. She looked at the grey-haired woman with cutouts in her slippers for her bunions to poke through and asked,
"Shall I draw the curtains?"
After wiping her nose with a grimy handkerchief, the woman said, "Blackout's been lifted, didn't you know? Not fully, but we're getting there." Tolly let out a belly laugh.
"It's finally coming to an end," she said. "This damn war will soon be over."
Dorothy laughed too.
"Wonderful," she said. "We didn't know."
"Well, there ain't no wireless on the cut, is there?" The old woman shuffled off, wafting body odour.
"Wonder how she knew we're from the cut," Tolly mused. "We look like ragamuffins, that's how," said Elsie. "Is the canal company going to reprimand us for taking longer than we should have?"
Izzy asked, putting down her cutlery.
"When I phoned from Tyseley Depot and picked up the post, nothing was said. I was expecting them at least to ask for details about the accident."
It was easier to refer to the accident than Charlie's death.
"And did they?"
asked Elsie. Dorothy shook her head.
My superior mentioned Geoffrey's name, so I knew he'd told them what had happened. But they didn't quiz me. Knowing a solicitor can be a blessing. I'd wondered if I might lose my job. It wasn't anything to do with you, though, was it? And Charlie was trespassing on our boat.
Tolly was indignant. Dorothy saw the glisten of tears in Izzy's eyes.
Stop talking about it. Some of us don't need to remember.
She paused, then foraged in her handbag.
Anyway, I picked up the post.
Tolly said,
Anything for me?
Dorothy handed her a letter. She stared at the envelope.
It's from Tommy, she said. He told me he'd write.
Then Dorothy passed one to Elsie.
No need for you to wonder who that's from. It's got kisses on the back.
Elsie snatched it and said, laughing,
Why shouldn't my Jack put kisses on his letters?
Sorry, Dorothy said to Izzy.
Nothing for you or me.
Back at Tyseley, after walking around the shops, which seemed virtually empty of stock, and marvelling at the lights shining onto pavements and spilling into the sky, Dorothy discovered the holds on both boats had been filled with scrap metal. She identified parts of planes, old saucepans, bits of iron railings.
One good thing, we didn't need to clean the holds for that, she said. Saved us more back-breaking work, but we'd better get them covered before the rain adds even more weight.
She looked at both boats lying low in the water.
I'll get the office to sign us out, and we'll find somewhere to moor up for the night. Best we top up here with diesel and water, though, she said.
Sooner or later, Dorothy knew they would have to pass back through the tunnel where Charlie's accident occurred. Thank God they wouldn't reach it tonight, she thought. It was so nice to have the girls happy, and she hated the thought of them becoming depressed again. As soon as the tarpaulins covered the holds, the rain ceased, and the sharp, cold air smelt of smoke. Dorothy wasn't sure if it was because on a return journey the countryside looked different, or if each woman was trying to spare the other's feelings, but the tunnel came and went. Nothing was said. At Banbury, the scrap was unloaded. Dorothy was aware of the girls' low morale, but it was to be expected. All of them were tired, and the memories didn't help. With the holds empty, they soaked mops and scrubbed down the boats in readiness for their return to Lower Hayford.
Don't worry about yourselves, Dorothy said. When we reach the basin of Rousham Cruises, you can use my little house to have baths and clean yourselves up. She still hoped that Izzy would prefer to stay on the cut in her own boat. Elsie had told her Jack would be more than willing to give Izzy a lift to Braunston, where Jonquil was waiting for her, but Izzy declined. I think I'd prefer to be around people for a while, instead of on my own. Going to Southampton with you, Dorothy, is just what I need. I'll cope better.
With Dorothy in charge of Mallard and Izzy steering Bunting, the two boats entered the basin at Lower Hayford. Amazingly, Tommy was already at Rousham Yard, looking completely different. He wore a suit and was waiting in the office talking to Maisie, the office girl, when Dorothy pushed open the door. He looked disappointed that Tolly wasn't with her. He'd brought with him a huge bunch of flowers. Dorothy wondered where he got them. Digging for victory had put paid to flower cultivation.
The girls are at my house bathing and making themselves beautiful, she said. You can either go across now or wait for me.
She told him she had paperwork to deal with. Maisie put the kettle on, and Tommy left them to it. Dorothy had already spotted Jack's car and heard the excited barking of a dog. She so hoped Elsie would think again about doing another trip with her. An arrow of sadness pierced her heart that no one was waiting for her. Maisie handed her a letter from head office, and Dorothy opened it with trepidation. She'd been exonerated of blame for Charlie's death. She wondered what had happened to Charlie's body. Geoffrey had told her it would be sent back to Gosport. Casualties of war were buried with dignity, even if no relatives came forward, he'd assured her. She assumed that would also be the fate of accident victims. Dorothy decided she would make it her business to find out, in case Izzy asked her. The letter gave the date and time that she should start the next trip. There was also a footnote warning of cuts by the company. The sparse information was as she'd expected. With the war coming to an end, Men would return from fighting. Women who had taken on their jobs would be required to step down, the work needed for the men. Also, the railways could go back to hauling materials when the fear of bombing diminished. Idle women would disappear. End of CD 7. CD 8. After completing her paperwork and chatting with Maisie, Dorothy went to look at Elsie's car. Elsie had given her the key and, after removing the tarpaulin, she made sure the tyres were sound and started the engine, which, amazingly, fired first time. Then she went over to Mallard and Bunting to give the boats a final check for cleanliness. She needn't have worried. Both craft were spotless. She smiled, remembering her crew's horror at the Keatings powder. The girls had already packed up their belongings, which lay safely in grubby holdalls and bags on the concrete path, awaiting collection. Such a lot had happened on this trip. She'd made friends. Even the awful rain hadn't managed to dampen their spirits too much. Neither had the heavy locks and stiff lift bridges, nor the dark, damp tunnels filled with the ghosts of the men who'd perished while building the cut all those years ago. First to leave was Elsie. Jack looked happy to have her and her belongings in his care, and the little white dog danced over the car's seats. Dorothy steeled herself not to shed a tear when she hugged her through the open window. Tolly was next, hurling instructions at Tommy, who'd hired a taxi for the occasion. He looked delighted as he stowed Tolly's bags in the boot. Dorothy hugged each of them and hoped they would return. Soon, she and Izzy were alone in the small, comfortable cottage. Izzy said,
"It's funny without Elsie and Tolly, isn't it?"
"We'll meet up again quite soon," Dorothy said, though she too felt dispirited. Izzy looked relieved.
"When I come back," she said, "I shall visit the Black Cow and meet up with my friends there. I promised I would."
Dorothy smiled at her. "Friends are everything," she said. "Now, as we're not leaving until tomorrow morning, who's cooking tonight, me or you?" Izzy volunteered to make a hasty meal, and they got ready for an early start. Tomorrow, she and Izzy would be on their way to Southampton. Dorothy wasn't looking forward to it. Chapter 37. Izzy wasn't sure what to expect on reaching Southampton and the place where Dorothy lived. Southampton, not far from Gosport and a big dockland city in its own right, had also experienced severe bomb damage. Dorothy's home was in a terraced house near the docks. Huge cranes loomed over freighters, and the smell of oil hung in the air. "I hope you weren't expecting something more grand. My mum sacrificed a lot for me. Now it's my turn to keep her." The back street house had a small front garden surrounded by privet hedges. Although Dorothy had the key ready in her hand, the door opened, and a woman, who was obviously her mother, flew into her arms, then hugged Izzy. A smell of baking followed her from the hallway. "Come in," she cried. "I expect you two could do with a cup of tea. How nice to meet you. Izzy, is it?" Dorothy's mother told Izzy her name was May. Small and dark, she had on a wraparound pinny over a skirt and jumper. "I've put you two together in the back bedroom. If it's not suitable, one of you could sleep on the sofa here." She pointed out an uncomfortable-looking piece of furniture near the fire. Against one wall, a Morrison shelter was kitted out with blankets and pillows. A large dresser held plates and knickknacks. Everything shone with polish. "Don't fuss, Mum," warned Dorothy. She was looking about her expectantly.
"We've been living in such cramped conditions. I'm sure everything will be fine,"
assured Izzy. May smiled, then put a finger to her lips, motioning them both to be quiet. "Alfie's asleep," she said, as though that explained everything. She hugged Dorothy again and disappeared into the scullery.
"Alfie?"
Izzy looked at Dorothy. "My little brother," Dorothy said. "He's a toddler, a right handful. I'll go out and bring in the bags. You make yourself comfortable." Izzy nodded. They'd had to park the car away from the house, as piles of bricks left over from the last bombing still cluttered the road. Was it her imagination, or had Dorothy been glad to get her out of the room? She hadn't mentioned her brother, but then, she thought, Dorothy never spoke about her home. She wondered how old May was. If Dorothy was in her early 30s, it must have been quite a surprise for May to discover she was pregnant again after so long. Perhaps Alfie was one of those change babies, she thought. Often, when a woman was coming to the end of her childbearing years, starting the change of life, they sometimes fell for a late baby. Perhaps Dorothy's father was in the services. Could that be why Dorothy didn't talk about him? Loose lips, sink ships, and all that? Of course, he might even have died. Didn't Dorothy say she provided for her mother? Izzy shook herself. Thinking about people dying reminded her of Charlie. She tried to push him from her thoughts. Instead of wondering about Dorothy's life and her family tree, she should be grateful she didn't have to go back to Gosport, where every street would remind her of Charlie. She should be planning for her new life. She thought about the rug-making equipment she'd brought with her, intending to sit indoors and work on it while Dorothy spent time with her mother. Eventually, Izzy would venture out in her boat on the waterways, selling the things she'd made. She really wasn't looking forward to another trip for the Canal Company, but she'd promised Dorothy, and couldn't very well let her down, could she? A little later, sipping tea and eating cake May had made, the three women chatted about the past trip on the canals. Izzy thought how comfortable she felt in their company. She decided that before they went back to the basin at Lower Hayford, she would take a trip home to Gosport. It would be nice to see her own mother now she had nothing to fear. A child's cry interrupted Izzy's thoughts. Both May and Dorothy rose to their feet. "I'll get Alfie," May said. Dorothy's face was inscrutable as her mother told her to sit down again. It wasn't long before May clattered downstairs with a blonde, blue-eyed toddler in her arms. Izzy saw tears in Dorothy's eyes as she put out her arms to take him from her mother. Izzy was surprised when May snapped, "Don't get him all excited. You know he won't sleep tonight if you do." The little boy's podgy arms went towards Dorothy and he was saying, "Do, do, do, do." He had a broad smile on his sleep-creased face. Izzy remembered Dorothy buying a wooden toy car at a shop in Braunston. At the child's words, a smile lit Dorothy's eyes, and she enfolded him in her arms, holding him close. "He's wet," said May. "Hasn't quite got the hang of using a potty. I'll take him out to the scullery and wash him." Izzy thought the little boy was going to cry. His bottom lip trembled as Dorothy relinquished him. And Dorothy was loath to let him go, thought Izzy. Quickly, May distracted him by shaking a coloured rattle, then taking him from Dorothy. As May and Alfie disappeared into the scullery, Izzy couldn't help asking, "Where's his dad?" "Away," was the only answer she got. Izzy nodded. It was as she had thought. So many men were fighting abroad. So many women had been left at home to bring up children alone. "I help as much as I can," Dorothy said. Izzy decided she would do whatever she could to make things easier for May, Dorothy, and her baby brother. She didn't suppose May got much of a break from the little boy. She would offer to mind him while May and her daughter went into the town and looked around the shops or had a meal in a cafe. They'd find it easier to talk together without the distractions of a little boy. She could always take Alfie to the park she'd spotted in the centre of the city. The more she thought about it, the better the idea seemed. "I'm taking my stuff upstairs. Coming?" Dorothy asked. May had closed the scullery door. The back bedroom was comfortable. A double bed stood in the centre of the room, with its brass bedstead against the wall. There was a washstand with a jug and bowl on top of it. Dorothy opened its door to show her a chamber pot inside. Once upon a time, Izzy would have died to think she might use that in a shared room. But after the bucket on the boat, she was ready for anything. A wardrobe stood in the corner, and a dressing table with a mirror caught the light from the window. It was all very clean, smelt of lavender polish and homely.
Which side do you prefer to sleep? The window side, Izzy said. Fine by me, Dorothy replied. She began removing dirty clothes from her holdall. I must get the copper going for hot wash to wash this lot, she said. She took out her brush and comb and a little bag of makeup and set them on the dressing table. Izzy saw her put a piece of paper beneath her pillow. She was surprised to see the blush on Dorothy's face. I always tuck it under my pillow. Oh? It's the last communication I had from the man I love. She seemed troubled, but then she removed the piece of paper and passed it towards Izzy. It had been handled so many times the paper felt like a piece of thin cloth.
Darling Dorothy, please excuse this writing, but I'm in a lorry only a few miles from Dover. A dispatch rider caught up with us on our way back to Camberley. We have orders not to return to camp. I can only think we are on our way to France or Belgium. I will write again as soon as I can. I'll ask someone to put this in the post for me. At least you'll have some idea where I've gone if you don't hear from me soon. Love, Jakub. P.S. You mean all the world to me.
Oh, Dorothy! You haven't heard from him since?
She was looking at the date on the letter. Dorothy shook her head.
I miss him so much. We were going to marry. I have no idea if he's dead or not. That letter is very dear to me. At least I know he loved me.
She sighed, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then sniffed and said,
I'm sorry. You've had enough problems of your own. You don't need to hear about mine.
Just then May called up the stairs. I'm going to take Alfie to see the children playing in the park. Do you want to come? Almost in unison, Dorothy and Izzy called back yes. They laughed. Dorothy said, I'll get Mum to fill the copper with water, and tomorrow we can wash out all our dirty clothes and get them on the line in the garden. A smile still lit her face. It'll be lovely watching Alfie playing on the grass in the park, she said. I don't know about you, but I'm starving. Mum's made a stew for our evening meal. She gave Izzy a hug. We should take advantage of not having to open heavy locks and lift iron bridges. You two coming or not? May's voice came from downstairs. Coming, they chorused. Chapter 38. Izzy felt she was truly on holiday with so little manual work to do. She swept the house, peeled potatoes for meals, and generally made herself useful. Not having to rise early, then lounging in an armchair, listening to the wireless, made her feel very lazy. She'd hoped last night in bed that Dorothy might continue with her story about Jakub, but all she'd received was silence, until Alfie had woken crying. This morning, she had a headache.
The Allies are surrounding Aachen in Germany,
said Izzy, when Dorothy and May returned home from shopping in Kingsland Market.
I heard it on the wireless.
All the stallholders are talking about it, Dorothy said. Does it mean Germany will surrender? Hitler will never give in, said May. Then to Alfie, who had let out a high-pitched yell in his pushchair, Oh, do give over, Alfie. He's been grizzling all morning, said Dorothy. We couldn't look at anything in the market because as soon as we stopped, he cried. I think he's got more teeth coming through. Dorothy bent down and unclipped the little boy from his harness, pulling him into her arms. Izzy could see how much she cared for the little chap. Damn, said May, I didn't buy potatoes. That's because he started crying when we reached the butcher's stall and he saw the dead rabbits hanging up. Izzy said, Why not leave him with me, and the pair of you go back and pick up the things you forgot? Kingsland Market was 2 minutes up the road near the bridge. Really? Said May. She looked delighted. Are you sure? Asked Dorothy. Perhaps I should stay here as well. You're coming with me, snapped May. It was almost, Izzy thought, as though May resented Dorothy spending any time with Alfie. She told herself she was being silly. I wouldn't offer it if I didn't mean it, said Izzy. Go now, before I change my mind. I can see to Alfie.
I do know how to look after a little one, you know.
I'm not waiting to be asked twice, said May. She'd started undoing her coat, but now she refastened the buttons. We won't be long, she added. Izzy moved the pushchair into the living room, then took Alfie from Dorothy.
Go on. Go out with your mum for 5 minutes. I can cope.
Dorothy dropped a big kiss on Alfie's forehead.
Go to Auntie Lizzie.
The little boy grinned. Oh, will you put another log on the fire? It's so nice that Alfie stopped whining for a moment, May said. You've definitely got the magic touch with kiddies.
Go on, quickly, before I change my mind,
persisted Izzy.
Shoo!
Lack of sleep had contributed to Izzy's headache. Dorothy had also woken and a couple of times slipped from the bed to listen to May at the bedroom door as she attended to the child. A few moments later, Izzy was alone with Alfie. Alfie was tangling his sticky fingers in her hair as the front door closed.
Let's find you something to play with, shall we?
She said. She had seen how Alfie would play for a long while rattling pots and pans, so she deposited him on the floor while she removed the fire guard and livened up the fire with a couple of bits of coal and a log. Alfie had already struggled to his feet and walked unsteadily around the furniture, following her. She went into the scullery to rinse her hands and find something for Alfie to play with. Izzy took down saucepans, lids, and took out wooden spoons from the drawer for him to use as drumsticks, then looked down at the floor, expecting to see his little face grinning up at her. A familiar sound, that of the shovel in the fireplace scraping the hearth in the living room, assailed her ears. She was just in time to snatch the shovel away from him before Alfie poked it into the fire. Izzy had forgotten to replace the fire guard. Grabbing the wriggling child, she fell into an armchair and began to wrestle off his outer garments. Alfie took exception to her removing his coat and started to scream. Izzy persevered with his coat and shoes that had to be unbuttoned. Not an easy feat when the little boy was wriggling like an eel. The one item of clothing Alfie wouldn't allow her to remove was his blue hat with fluffy bobbles.
Right, little man, you can keep it on,
she said, giving in to the child squirming in her lap. Happy now, he slipped from her knees and, while she quickly put the fireguard back in place, toddled away, knocking into items of furniture as he disappeared into the scullery. Remembering the pots and pans that he loved were on the floor, she breathed a sigh of relief. Izzy began turning his coat right side out, in readiness to leave on the newel post in the hall where it usually hung. Her sigh of relief had dissipated when she listened and heard silence. It took mere seconds for her to fly into the scullery, grab the child by the legs, and forcibly remove him from where he lay beneath the galvanized wash copper. To manage that, she had to lie on the floor to turn off the gas tap. Alfie had been studying the flames burning beneath the water-filled copper that had been lit to boil for her and Dorothy to wash their dirty clothes. Alfie thought it was a game and chuckled as she swung him up into her arms in safety.
It's obvious I can't leave you on the floor down here,
Izzy said. A string of dribble fell from his plump lips.
There are too many bad distractions for you. Well, go upstairs. You could wear a person out in no time.
Izzy remembered May had muttered something about Alfie being overtired and needing a nap. In May's bedroom, Izzy placed Alfie in the white-painted high-sided cot. He stood gripping the bars and staring at her, tears on his cheeks. One word came from him. No! He shook his head, and the bobbles on his hat danced frantically. The noise cut through her head like a saw. Izzy gazed around the room, which looked over the street, hoping for inspiration. It contained a double bed with a cotton bedspread, on which May's nightgown was folded. The cot, a small white chest of drawers, a bigger brown chest of drawers, and a wardrobe with the door ajar. Izzy thought, be firm. She turned away from him. Before she reached the door, the screams forced her to turn back. Alfie's face was blotchy with tears. Her heart shattered into little pieces. He was only a baby, wasn't he? Her resolve weakened. She strode back to the cot, lifted him out, and carried him through to the back bedroom. Izzy climbed onto the bed she'd shared with Dorothy, and eyeball to eyeball started a staring cost with Alfie. He giggled, and so did Izzy. He looked so lovable in his blue knitted romper suit and blue hat. Izzy pulled out his jumper and blew on his fat belly, and he laughed. She did it again, feeling lighter and happier now she seemed to have the upper hand with him. The more she blew on his skin, the more he laughed, kicking his legs high in the air, his arms flailing and tangling in her hair. "'Gen," he said, and yawned. "'Gen," he demanded. So the game continued. He smelt of little boy, milk and talcum powder. The game went on and on until Izzy was thoroughly sick of it, but his laughter was infinitely better than his tears. And then came the blessed moment when he didn't say "gen," and Izzy saw his eyes flicker and close. He was asleep. She lay with the child in her arms, remembering that the gate was fixed so he couldn't topple down the steep stairs.
"You're so lovely,"
she whispered, watching his body rise and fall with his breathing. She'd already assured herself that, apart from rugs and shoes, there was nothing on the bedroom floor with which he could hurt himself. Ever so softly, so she wouldn't wake him, Izzy kissed his downy cheek. Then she, too, closed her eyes. It was the air raid siren that woke Izzy, and the sound of the front door banging open. She looked across the bed for Alfie. He was gone. "Izzy!" Dorothy's call cut through the noise of the siren. Izzy fell off the bed and was rewarded with Alfie's cry of delight. "Do, do!" Where was he? Nothing looked out of place in the bedroom. Nevertheless, Izzy looked beneath the bed. "Izzy!"
"Coming!"
she called, stumbling towards May's bedroom. She breathed a sigh of relief. Alfie sat on the floor near the open wardrobe door, stuffing paper into his mouth. He turned and smiled at her. A piece of chewed paper fell to the lino. Around him lay the remains of letters he'd obviously discovered in a shoebox at the bottom of the wardrobe. All were crumpled. Some were wet with spittle. A quick look around told her this was the only part of the bedroom he'd desecrated. Without bothering to look properly at what he was eating, Izzy stuck her finger into his mouth and pulled out the slimy paper. She slammed the wardrobe door shut, snatched a letter held in his wet hand, and continued scooping up the paper until the floor was clear. With Alfie under one arm and a handful of soggy paper in the other, she marched into the back bedroom and shoved the offending material beneath the bedspread. Alfie began to wail. The smell coming from him was eye-watering. Potty. She'd forgotten May was attempting to train him.
We're up here,"
she yelled. By now, moaning Minnie had seized her caterwauling, and holding the child firmly, Izzy carefully unclipped the gate at the top of the stairs and began to descend. She heard the whine of the V2. Dorothy was unclipping the bottom stair gate. The noise of the unmanned rocket ceased. Izzy stood with her back against the wall of the stairway and waited, holding her breath, and prayed, her face against Alfie's head. Izzy heard "Oh my God" from May somewhere near the front door. Alfie was silent. The loud bang that followed set him screaming, and pieces of distemper fell from the ceiling, the house reverberating with the aftershock. From the hallway came a shriek. "Alfie!" May appeared at the bottom of the stairs, and Izzy practically fell down the last of the steps, thrusting him into May's outstretched arms. "Too late for shelter. Get into the Morrison," Dorothy commanded. In the living room, the cage-like refuge welcomed them. Another whine and the following silence had Izzy's heart pounding like a drum. The dreadful explosion, when it finally arrived, sounded close. The docks, she wondered. Working on the peaceful canals, which Hitler didn't seem bothered about, she had forgotten how mind-numbing a raid could be. Izzy could almost feel the fear coming off Dorothy and May. Alfie wriggled on May's lap as she said, "Has Alfie behaved himself?" Izzy breathed shallowly. Somehow, Alfie's blue bonnet had swept back and now lay around his neck. The pom-poms were wet and chewed.
"He's been a perfect angel."
Chapter 39. Dorothy gazed out of the bedroom window at the washing dancing on the line. It wasn't often a breeze caught their blouses and jumpers. On the narrowboats, wet washing was hung around the stove to dry. It should have been easier to fix a line outside the boat, but the stiff breezes that came from nowhere resulted in clothes disappearing, even when pegged. She breathed a sigh of relief. Wearing the same clothes day after day seemed quite natural on the cut. Everyone lived in a similar way. After all, you couldn't change after every little shower. The V2s had passed and done their damage elsewhere, and the little house was still standing unscathed. Her mother had taken Alfie to the park, and Izzy was downstairs wiping out the copper and mopping the scullery floor, where water had splashed when they'd rinsed the clothes in the big stone sink. She sat down on the bed and heard paper rustle. Pulling back the bedspread, she saw twisted, torn and chewed envelopes and screwed-up typewritten pages, addressed to her. She picked up a lump of what at first glance appeared to be masticated bread. Surely this was Alfie's work. Using a fingernail to dissect it, she saw what was undoubtedly pencil marking, almost indecipherable. One half of a page was readable. It was from regimental headquarters, dated December 1942, and said, "I regret to inform you, as named next of kin of Jakub Kowalski, that your fiancé is reported missing by the War Office. He may have been captured and could now be a prisoner of war. You may be assured they will make every effort to locate his position. There was a heavy bombardment of the port by the Germans." Here, the typewritten sheet was torn away. "Battalion attacked. I hope you will not give up hope of his eventual And there it ended. Dorothy began reading the scraps again. She looked once more at the date. Surely that couldn't be right. How had she not known about this letter, when the last communication she'd received from Jakub was in May 1942? She was sure her heart's thudding would be heard all over the house. There was part of a wrapper from a tin, round, red, fruit-like objects on the paper. She couldn't see what they were, and the printing was in Polish. That much she could tell. On the glue-covered reverse, she found writing so small she would need to find the magnifying glass to read what she could. Her heart gave a huge lurch. It was from Jakub. She knew his fine copperplate script. Surely this couldn't have come through the post. Wouldn't it have had to be enclosed in an envelope? Why hadn't she set eyes on it before? From downstairs, she could hear Izzy singing along with the wireless. Her voice was lusty and carried well, though out of tune. How had these fragments of letters come to be strewn beneath the bedspread? Dorothy picked up another partly chewed missive. This time, it was a printed postcard.
"Dear Dorothy, I have just arrived in Hanover. This field service postcard says in German, I am a POW. I am well and in Germany. Jakub."
She let it slip from her fingers. Hanover? But she'd had no idea where he was. She picked up a crumpled letter. The beginning and end of the page were missing, but she could see once again it was Jakub's handwriting. There were too many holes in the paper for her to be able to read more than,
"Last letter from you in April. I am in hospital. My arm, a small wound. Keep in touch with regimental headquarters in London."
Dorothy spread out the pages and envelopes. Her muddled brain was still trying to make sense of the fact that these letters had been delivered after she'd thought she'd had the last letter from her beloved Jakub. Why had she not known of their existence? Dorothy couldn't help herself. She read the information in those scraps of paper again and let out a single scream that had Izzy rushing upstairs and bursting into the room.
"Dorothy, whatever's the matter?"
Immediately Izzy saw what Dorothy had in her hands. She put her arms around her. The sounds were terrible, like those of an animal in pain. Amazingly, Dorothy didn't shake her away.
It's possible. Jakub's alive,
Dorothy said, when the comfort of Izzy's arms had soothed her enough to talk without sobbing.
All this time, I thought he was gone, dead, and now it might not be so.
She looked into Izzy's eyes.
Do you know where these pieces of paper have come from?
Izzy looked guilty, then said hesitantly,
I fell asleep this morning with Alfie, and he got into your mum's wardrobe. You came back, and then there was the V2. I only had time to hide these. I was more worried about Alfie.
She gave a strangled sob.
I meant to come and sort them out, but with the raid and then the washing, I forgot.
Dorothy said,
Do you know what this means?
Izzy shook her head.
I never examined the pieces. Never had time with you, yelling up the stairs at me and moaning Minnie doing her bit.
Izzy was breathless.
I took the bits off Alfie and didn't dare put them back in the wardrobe for fear May would discover I hadn't been looking after her little one properly. Alfie is my child.
The silence was almost deafening.
Alfie belongs to me,
repeated Dorothy. Izzy, obviously shocked, stared at her. Then she picked up one of Dorothy's hands and whispered,
Tell me.
Dorothy took a deep breath.
Mum and I were living in Portsmouth. One night, I went to Kimball's dance hall with a friend. I met Jakub with some of his Polish mates. They had a weekend army pass. He walked me home. We met up again, and it wasn't long before I fell in love with him. My dad had been killed in action. He was in the Navy, and my mum was going round the bend with grief. She was pregnant from Dad's last home leave. It was a shock. She thought she was over all that business, but her little boy was born dead.
Izzy pulled her hand away from Dorothy's to stroke back strands of hair that had escaped the scraped-back bun.
Oh, how awful, she said. Awful's not the word, said Dorothy. I was worried for her sanity. What happened? Jakub was going to be sent to Camberley. I'm not making excuses for myself or my behaviour, but one night we went too far. By the time I knew I was expecting, I'd received this letter.
She patted the pillow that covered it.
He never knew he was going to be a father when he went away.
She stared hard at Izzy.
So there I was, pregnant and unmarried. All the neighbours would be pointing their fingers at me. I'd be ostracised, lose my job. I was working at Lyons then in the tea shop. Mum came up with a way out of our problems.
Chapter 40. Dorothy saw that Izzy was confused.
It sounded like the best way out of our difficulties. I had the baby and we moved to Southampton. It wasn't hard to rent this place. The owners had gone into the country to escape the bombing, you see.
She stared at Izzy.
From the moment we arrived, Mum pretended Alfie was hers. She lavished all the care and attention on him that she couldn't give to her own baby. I got a job on the narrowboats.
Dorothy gulped.
To tell the truth, I couldn't bear to be around and watch my son being loved so much, while I had to take a back seat and pretend he was my brother. Did Jakub find out about the baby? I'd written to him. I had what I thought was his final letter before he went abroad. There was no reply to any of my letters. I believed him to be dead.
She looked at the horror on Izzy's face.
Maybe you have no idea what it's like to be an unmarried mother. People can be vicious. Come on, Dorothy. I come from Gosport. Life's no easier there. Are you pointing the finger at me? Not at all. I don't know where you got the courage to do such a brave thing.
Dorothy breathed a sigh of relief.
I couldn't bear it if you judged me, she said. I wondered at you looking at Alfie with such love in your eyes, but I could see sadness as well.
Izzy paused.
May goes to great lengths to stop you getting too involved with him, doesn't she?
Dorothy shrugged.
She gave me a new start without all the tongue-wagging. I cried a lot, thinking Alfie would be called a bastard. Mum's idea seemed the ideal answer. And it was helping her get over the shock of first losing Dad, then her own child. Alfie's not forward for his age, especially with walking and talking. But when he began calling her Mum and me Doo-Doo, oh, how that hurt. But there's no other way. I have to put up with it. I work to keep the home going.
Izzy was staring at her.
I see what you mean, but your Jakub might very well be alive in that prison camp.
The enormity of the situation wasn't lost on Dorothy.
It also means my mother has been keeping letters from me.
Again silence descended. Only their breathing could be heard in the small back bedroom.
First, you have a right to look in her wardrobe and see if there's anything else she's hiding from you.
Izzy's voice was clear.
Normally, I'd say you shouldn't look at her private stuff, but this is different, isn't it?
She pulled Dorothy up from the bed. Dorothy said,
Even if there's nothing else of mine there, I'm going straight over to the park and having this out with her.
Izzy held her back.
Don't be foolish. What's the point of that? You shouldn't really argue in front of Alfie. Things are bound to get heated. And why let complete strangers know your business? But I need answers.
Dorothy was adamant.
And here's me thinking the job on the cut taught you patience. Why don't you wait until the little one's in bed? I'll come up here out of the way, and you can speak to your mum in private.
I can't wait that long, Dorothy said.
Of course you can. If anything, the longer you wait, the more you'll cool down. Besides, like I've already said, she's your mum, and anyone can see how much she loves you and Alfie.
Dorothy stared at Izzy. The young woman was right.
Come with me,
she said, leaving the back bedroom. In the bottom of May's wardrobe, the shoebox sat askew on top of other boxes. Dorothy removed it and foraged inside, discovering birth certificates, marriage lines, the usual paraphernalia her mother would keep safe. The rent book was up to date, and there was also a blue post office savings book. She flicked open the pages and looked at the large amount credited.
Look at this,
Dorothy said.
I'm ahead of you. See who she's saving the money for?
May had been putting money away for Dorothy every week since she began work on the narrowboats. Dorothy saw her own name on the book, which meant she alone could withdraw the money. She gasped.
Why would she do this? Because she's your mum and she loves you. I don't know how many times I have to say that before it sinks into your head.
I feel guilty now, said Dorothy.
Maybe you should.
Izzy was putting everything back into the box.
Just remember to listen to her side of things. She should have given me my letters.
Dorothy was insistent. Izzy ignored her.
It looks like the box had fallen down, she said. I'm sure the door wasn't locked, so it was easy for Alfie to get at it while I slept.
Dorothy heard the guilt in her voice.
While you slept, she repeated. But there aren't any more letters here for me. No, said Izzy. And I think she meant you to have those sometime, or she'd have destroyed them. Well, they're torn up now. Not by May, Izzy said. And she didn't exactly hide them where they'd never be found, did she? What makes you so clever?
Dorothy was being sarcastic.
Dealing with Charlie,
said Izzy. Dorothy looked at her. She saw the glisten of tears in the younger woman's eyes and remembered all the awful things that had happened to Izzy. No wonder Steve-O had wanted her to have peace. Izzy closed the wardrobe door on its secrets and took Dorothy's arm.
Let's go downstairs. Everything looks better after a cup of tea, doesn't it?
During the evening meal, Izzy tried her best to make conversation go with the swing. The wireless was belting out dance music, and May was chatty with the pair of them. She'd baked a few scones, and they ate them with the last of the jam from the garden's small Victoria plum tree. Maybe, Izzy thought, May was used to Dorothy's moodiness. After all, there were times on the boat when Dorothy was quiet and thoughtful. Of course, she knew the reason for her friend's silence now. Izzy admired Dorothy for her patience. May put Alfie to bed. When she returned, Dorothy gave Izzy a look that meant she was to make herself scarce.
I'm going to bed as well. Think I'll read for a while. John Steinbeck's The Moon is Down has me gripped.
As she passed Dorothy, she whispered,
Be careful. Think about what your mother means to you.
Izzy was reading when the raised voices floated upstairs. She prayed that whatever the outcome between mother and daughter, the little time they had left before she and Dorothy visited Izzy's mum in Gosport would be peaceful. After a while, the house became silent. Izzy eventually slept. Izzy woke the next morning to breakfast in bed. Dorothy, already dressed, sat beside her.
Come on, wakey wakey, we're going to Gosport today. I thought that was tomorrow,
said Izzy sleepily.
No, and I want you up and dressed quickly after you've eaten that.
It was a plate of fried potatoes, scrambled powdered egg and bread. Izzy shifted herself into a sitting position. She remembered why she'd gone to bed early last night. It was obvious Dorothy hadn't come to bed at all. She wondered where and if she had slept. With the warm plate now on her knees, Izzy asked,
You're very chirpy. What happened when you confronted May?
Just then May called up the stairs.
We're off now. You'll be gone by the time we get back.
Dorothy went to the top of the stairs.
Bye,
she called. Then, coming back into the bedroom, she said,
I blew a kiss from you to both of them.
Izzy heard the front door open, heard the pushchair scrape over the step, and then May called again.
I did the ironing, but leave it until you collect the rest of your stuff.
Izzy heard the door slam. She put down her knife and fork.
This is only the second time you've ever cooked me breakfast in bed, and I'm not eating it until you tell me what happened.
Dorothy sighed.
Well, I started on her all blustery and wanting to know the ins and outs.
Izzy looked expectantly at her.
Mum said, if Jakub was in a German prison camp, I doubt you'd ever hear from him. The prisoner's letters home are seldom posted. That's what she said. You'd go on hoping and hoping. I didn't want that for you, love, she said. I was shocked when, after all that time of you having no replies to the letters you wrote one day, an envelope arrived with several bits and pieces tucked inside. At first I was going to post it on to you, but I wanted you to live your life to the full. Not go on hoping as I did, only to find your dad didn't come home after all.
Dorothy's face crumpled. A tear made its way down one cheek.
I waved the remains of the letters at her and said, but it wasn't your decision to make. And what happened next? Mum told me she soon felt she'd made the wrong decision. But she didn't know how to tell me without me blowing up, storming away and taking Alfie with me.
Dorothy got up and began pacing the bedroom.
She was right. That's what I would have done yesterday, until you told me to calm down and listen to her. I thought of how she'd stopped people pointing their fingers at me as an unmarried mother. She's always been there for me. She said maybe she hadn't been thinking straight after she'd lost her own baby. But after her decision to make me live every day as if it were my last, she found it harder to hand over the letters. But she kept them because, as you said...
Dorothy stopped pacing and stared at Izzy.
She intended to give them to me at some point. The money? She's put as much away from me as possible for a new start after the war, when I'm not needed on the narrowboats, and in case Jakub does, by some miracle, return.
Izzy transferred the breakfast tray to the floor.
How do you feel about that?
Dorothy sat down again on the edge of the bed.
Families do the strangest things in the name of love. You stopped me alienating myself from my mother, and I'll always be grateful for that. I don't think she knew my love for Jakub was so strong. Together, she and I are going to try to discover his whereabouts.
Izzy eyed the cup of tea on the bedside table.
And where did you sleep last night?
Dorothy coloured.
With my mum. listening to Alfie snoring, she said. Look, I've got you to thank for your good advice. That's why I think we should go and see your mum a day earlier. She'll be missing you. Besides, a little space will do me and my mum a world of good. What does May think about writing to the War Office? And what happens if Jacob is one of the lucky ones to survive and return home? Mum said, there's room enough within this family for us all to love Alfie. If his dad ever comes home, there'll be even more love.
Chapter 41. Oxfordshire, 1945. Elsie glanced through the front window. She was keeping an eye open for the rest of her guests. Daffodils were in full bloom in the garden. A small bell hung from the branches of the little cherry tree. Though she couldn't hear it from where she stood, she knew it was jangling sweetly in the wind. Her face lit with pleasure when she saw 3 figures nearing her front gate. The little boy's eyes focused on the bell, and he turned excitedly to his mother, who bent and whispered something that made him laugh. Elsie rushed to her front door, pulling it open.
Hello, she cried. It's so lovely to see you again.
I'd never have thought to do that, May said, fingering the wild spring flowers fashioned into a welcome wreath on the door of Lock Cottage.
I'll make you one to take home,
Elsie laughed. She felt momentary guilt that she had only a box containing homemade gifts for everyone, instead of shop-bought presents. But it was 1945, and the local shops contained little that was worth spending money on for her dearest friends. Make, do and mend was still the theme. Shortages were acute. Christmas had been awful with provisions so scarce. There had been shops with 5 Christmas puddings and 500 registered customers. Easter eggs were non-existent. The birth of a baby remained magical, especially her daughter Ruby, a jewel for Jack and herself. The christening was arranged for Sunday in the village church, its stained glass window still intact and lit now the blackout had finally been fully lifted. Elsie thought of the vibrant colours that would shine through, and her heart was filled once more with joy. She was longing to hear Dorothy's news. Come in, come in. She threw her arms around Dorothy and practically dragged her, May and Alfie, indoors. Matey, the Jack Russell, was jumping and barking with sheer exuberance. The wireless was playing a Bing Crosby song, and his deep melodic voice blended with the chatter coming from the living room. It's lovely and warm in here, and it smells heavenly, gushed May. It was the scent of the applewood logs Jack had chopped for them to burn in the big open fireplace. Let's have your coats, Elsie said, and hung them on the hooks in the hallway. You look so well, returned Dorothy. I'm happy, that's why, said Elsie. She helped tuck off Alfie's boots before he ran into the large living room, followed by the excited dog. Come in and meet the others. Hello, Dorothy. The slim, dark-haired girl stepped forward and kissed her cheek, then threw her arms about her. Oh, my God! Tolly! Where have you gone? Elsie watched as Dorothy pushed her away to arm's length and stared at the girl in the tight dress. She's been helping me with decorating at the currant bun. I work so hard, I have to remind her to eat. I'll make sure she doesn't fade away, though, said Tommy. Tolly gave a twirl to show off her slim figure. With his now broad shoulders emphasised by his grey suit, Elsie knew Dorothy would find it hard to recognise Tommy as the skinny young man who'd fallen for Tolly. She was right. Tommy? Is it really you? Dorothy said. Who else would it be? He laughed and swept her into a hug. Elsie could smell his sandalwood cologne. I'll put the kettle on. Elsie went into the kitchen. I'll join you, said Dorothy, disentangling herself from Tommy. May and Alfie had found a comfortable seat near the fire and were now talking animatedly to Tolly. Elsie saw Dorothy look around the bright kitchen. You've made it so lovely here at the cottage. Not just me, Elsie said, as Matey jumped up on a stool and pawed at her. It's not just my doing, is it, Matey? She tickled the dog's neck.
"Where's Izzy?" Dorothy asked. "She'll be here soon. She's travelling along in her boat, and Jack's walking up the towpath to meet her."
Elsie lit the gas beneath the kettle. It made a loud pop, and Dorothy watched the blue and orange flames. Elsie began putting cups and saucers on a tray, taking them from a white-painted wall cupboard.
"It'll be lovely to see her," she said, "though she drops in when she's down this way." "She wrote and told me her business is doing well," Dorothy said. "She's been travelling around the canal selling the stuff she's made, hasn't she? I think she's content for the first time in her life."
Then Dorothy asked,
"Have you heard from Geoffrey recently?" "He and Jack have got quite friendly. He's still living on his own in Weston Way, and trying to put right the damage Sandra inflicted on the house and garden." "Has she had her baby?" "Oh, yes," said Elsie. "A little boy. Geoffrey said Sandra finally admitted the child's father is an American sailor she met in the Gosport pub."
She frowned before she continued.
"Anyone can see Geoffrey's not the father, but he settled some money on her and found her a rented flat in the town." "He wasn't so bad after all, was he?" said Dorothy. "Jack doesn't think so. He's asked him to be Ruby's godfather." "No! Would I lie to you?" Elsie laughed. It took her a while to get her next words out, and you won't believe it. Poor Geoffrey got left with Sandra's cat. Animals aren't allowed where she's living now. Fluffy and Geoffrey were sworn enemies, but apparently they've learned to tolerate each other. Fluffy even sleeps on Geoffrey's bed. You couldn't make it up, could you? I heard the Queen thanked all the women who had done men's jobs throughout the war. "Makes me feel proud of you all," Dorothy said. "Of course, my job won't last now, the war's over." Tommy poked his head round the door. "Jack won't be long. Izzy's boat's just gone through the lock. I had a sneaky peek out the front door, and they're tying up. If it's all right with you, I'd sooner have a beer than tea." "And no doubt Jack'll join you," agreed Elsie. "Help yourself from that barrel." She nodded towards a wooden cask on a stand by the kitchen's whitewashed wall. "Jack's tapped it ready for when guests come after the christening." She opened another cupboard and took out 2 glasses, handing them to Tommy. "How are you getting on with your new recruits?" Elsie asked Dorothy. "They're all right. Not a patch on you lot. Life is certainly quieter than it was with you. If you remember, after you left, Izzy and Tolly signed on for another trip. Christmas we had extra rations. 1.5 pounds of sugar each, 8p worth of meat and half a pound of sweets." She laughed. "Remember the sugar that burst from the crate in Limehouse and Tolly made apple pies?" Elsie wiped her eyes. "Oh, that pie was lovely," she said. "I wrote and told you Sonny got married, didn't I?" "I haven't come across them yet on the cut. You said his wife is a shy little thing. Not so shy or little that she couldn't give him a black eye for staying out all night in Birmingham." Dorothy poured the boiling water into the brown teapot. "Gypsy wives don't stand for any nonsense," she said. "Is this a private party or can anyone join in?" "Izzy!" Her red hair had grown longer, and she had it tied back with a green ribbon that matched exactly the colour of her long skirt. Her knitted top was as cheerful as her wide grin. She held up a white, lacy baby's dress, taken from a brown carrier bag. "I finished it." Elsie couldn't help the tears that spilled from her eyes. "Oh, it's beautiful. Just look at all that fine stitching. Jack," she called, "come and see your daughter's christening gown." "No need to shout, love. I'm right here." Jack pushed his spectacles up the bridge of his nose. He stood in the doorway, and his smile was just for her. Elsie knew she was the luckiest woman alive. He touched the gown. Beautiful. There was genuine awe in his voice and eyes. "Where's that tea?" "Just come in, Tolly." "I'll take the tray through, shall I?" Tommy had filled 2 glasses with beer. He winked at Jack and added them to the tray, picked it up, and disappeared into the living room. "Do you think Tolly knows she's got a good bloke there?" Jack asked. Oh, I think so. They're talking about getting engaged. Elsie put her hand over her mouth. Oh, dear, I'm stealing their thunder. I think they're going to announce it tonight.
Jack, called Tommy, what do you reckon to old Adolf killing himself then? Damn good show if you're asking. Jack walked into the living room where Izzy was now pouring tea. Started out painting and selling postcards and ended up being responsible for the deaths of some 30 million people. What did Churchill call him? A bloodthirsty gutter snipe, returned Tommy, taking a mouthful of beer. Ah, that's good. Should be. The publican of the Black Cow owed me that, Jack confided.
I've got some news I'd like to share with you, Dorothy broke in. Are we all together? But first, I'd like to say how grateful I am for your support, friendship and understanding about my own problems that, finally, my friends, I shared with you.
She had in her hand a letter and began to read to the hushed room.
Darling, the Germans have agreed to surrender Belsen to the British. One of the guards was at least human and has posted letters for us. He was severely reprimanded by the camp commandant. We have knowledge of evacuation, repatriation to rest camps in England. I pray I live to see you again, Dorothy. So many dead friends, women, children, so much sickness in mind and body, but now so much hope, my darling. Jakub.
The room was hushed until May broke the silence, saying to Alfie,
Your daddy's coming home, my love.
But still the silence went on. Elsie knew every one of her friends in that room was filled with a great sadness. No matter how much they had helped to win that terrible war, many, many people had paid the ultimate price, forfeited their lives. Again the silence was broken, this time by a lusty cry from upstairs. "I'll go and bring her down," said Jack. "I expect my little girl is hungry." He swallowed the last of his drink and left the glass on the table. Elsie put her arm around Dorothy's shoulders.
"You've a lifetime to make up for with Jakub," she said. "You both deserve happiness."
"I should say so," said Tommy. Izzy and Tolly agreed. Just then Jack came in with Ruby in his arms. Her long white nightgown was wet. "Look around, my little one," he said to the baby, holding her up so everyone could see her. "There's your 3 godmothers, who are going to guide and love you. There's Tolly, there's Izzy, and there's Dorothy. They were idle women, but not so idle at all." Elsie found his eyes now claiming hers, with a special look that was hers alone. Ruby opened her eyes, blinked, and began to cry. You have been listening to The Narrowboat Girls. It was written by Rosie Archer and read by Charlotte Strevens. This has been a Magna Story Sound presentation. If you have enjoyed this production, please write to us at Magna Story Sound, Kaywood House, Asquith Industrial Estate, Gargrave, Skipton, North Yorkshire, BD23 3SE, or call 01756 748 277, and you'll be sent a full list of our recordings.